Hi, everybody. My name is Kato Hakudo, and welcome to our interview session by Reset Revolution. Today, we'll be interviewing Maika Nebyan, who is actually a childhood friend of mine from Houston, Texas. And our topic today will be about mental health in education, and especially in Asian communities. So, Maika, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Maika. I'm a junior at HSPBA in Houston, Texas.
Perfect. All right. So before we get into the interview itself, could you give us like a brief description of what depression and anxiety is like?
Yes, these are mental health disorders, and it's honestly it's different for everyone how to perceive it and how to experience it. But depression generally is like intense amounts of sadness, and it gives you hopelessness, and so it makes it really hard for you to do even the simplest of tasks and just things that you really enjoy. Sometimes you find the joy in doing them anymore. And so it's a very deep and sometimes very dangerous disorder to go through. And then anxiety, again, with anxiety and depression, there's a lot of different kinds, but a general description of anxiety would be like you're constantly on edge, and you're very observe of how people will perceive you and how they will judge you. And that really affects your mentality of yourself. And so that usually, I think, really how anxiety would be perceived by the majority.
And the reason I think why we're kind of interviewing you is because you've had experiences with these two mental conditions. But could you maybe describe a little bit about how your personal experience was like and how it affected you in different ways?
So I don't really struggle as much with depression as I used to a few years ago. Just because in middle school your hormonal changes, so usually that's when kids typically get depressive episodes or depressive symptoms. So I struggled with that a lot in middle school, and luckily I've been able to get resources to help and supportive family and friends. And then anxiety recently developed that, I think, especially over quarantine. It's greatly for many people, including myself. I think anxiety has really emphasized my fear of public speaking and just talking to strangers, just trying to like work my way around socializing.
And you said earlier that your anxiety was more of like a recent thing, especially because of COVID. And do you think it's because of like the lack of interaction you had with people or?
Definitely, I think that because I enjoy being myself a lot, like I enjoy just having my own company. And so being around other people almost draining, it takes a lot of energy out of you. And
Mhm.
so now being accustomed to just by myself all the time, and then once in a while having to go, to a socially distant event, or, just going out to the store or something, that itself is very draining for my mental health and my physical health. And I think quarantine has definitely done that to a lot of people. I know a lot of friends who have said their anxiety and their depression have like skyrocketed just because they're constantly alone.
So, in terms of maybe even anxiety or even depression, you talked a little bit about like, the resources that you were, able to get in touch with in order to help you move forward. But can you explain what these resources were and how it helped you?
Yes. So I know how difficult it can be to, especially an adult who has access to maybe harder resources like medication or therapy, even. Um, so I think a good thing is to just tell somebody. So, like a friend, or you can tell a sibling. I'm very close with my brother, so I like to him more than I like to tell my parents, because that's still very hard for me to do, even after having dealt with it for a few years. And so telling someone just so somebody knows what's going on other than yourself, they have access to outer that you might be afraid to reach out to. And then also therapy. I've recently gotten back into therapy, and I cannot stress enough how good it is and how important I think everyone should have therapy. Even if you don't have a mental disorder, I think developing teenagers should have access to an outer outreach other than someone that they know personally, because I think it's so important to process their feelings with a professional therapist. And so I think also the stigma around therapy, that it's only for the mentally ill, and it's like it's seen as bad. I think that should really be erased. And then also a big thing that personally has helped me a lot is including therapy is journaling, just because like I have to let it out, but I don't want to tell people, and I don't want to tell family or friends. So I think the way that I went with it was journaling, because I'm still letting my thoughts out and my feelings, but it's still private. And so I feel safe doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I personally have never gone to therapy, and I honestly, like, there's a few of my friends that have, and it sounds like it's really helpful for them. So I do at one point want to try, just test it out what it's like. But yeah, that's something really powerful you just said. You earlier mentioned that people often that have depression, they just even the simplest task they just find really difficult. And whether that's depression or anxiety, like internally, how did it affect you to do like different simple tasks that you normally did on a basic, daily basis?
That's an intense question. I think usually if I have a very severe like episode, or just like a really really bad day where I instantly know like, okay, I need to take it slow today, because it's I think for physical, having trouble doing the simplest of tasks, for me it's like I need to move very slowly in order to be able to accomplish something. And it's not like a sense of dizziness per se, but it's just like if I go too fast, I will break down and shut down and kind of make it even harder for myself to move around. And so I know that the days that I do know that I will be having a rough and I'll be struggling mentally, I need to like I just need to remind myself it's okay to take it slow. And of course other people will notice, some people will understand, and some people notice and just kind of move along with their day. But for understand, I'm sure people will have at least one or two understanding people who will be okay. We can take it slow together. That always helps too.
I think today as well, like especially in our generation, everything just moves so quickly. And in terms of like you developing anxiety, depression, I think in middle school, it's I think a lot of the time, fueled in a lot of the educational facilities as well, because people around you, I'm not going to pinpoint any teachers or like parents or anything, but like in general, I think society just expects you to move so fast. It's like, so I think that's a really interesting point to bring out about taking it slow, maybe making sure that you remind yourself that it's all right to take a step back and look at it from a different light.
Another like big impact is schools. I go to a very competitive school, and so it's very competitive academically. So sometimes you meet people who are pretty selfish and who don't really are not considerate of other people, and maybe like their grades and how they're struggling with their classes. And so sometimes being friends with those people and then realizing that they have a very competitive academic side can really take a toll on you, and can really impact like, oh, am I just really bad in grades, or is it just like the group of people that I'm with that are a little bit different than me? And so that usually that can really affect someone's mentality and like their personal confidence, and
Mhm.
that also really can take a toll on anxiety or depression.
Mhm. you like hinted a little bit with like selfishness, and earlier during our personal conversations you said you wanted to, pinpoint how careless people can be, or like the ignorance that a lot of people hold about these conditions or these disorders. But could you elaborate on, the ignorance that you've experienced throughout your lifetime, and like, the lack of understanding other people have?
Yeah, so I think depression is usually like misunderstood just being sad. And I did say before that depression can be intense sadness, but like intense sadness, I meant like, you can be sad, but sometimes it can be days or weeks or even months if it's extremely severe. And so sometimes that's why it's so hard for some people to differentiate between being sad and being depressed. And so that's why it's always constantly interchanged between sentences like, oh, are you depressed today? Or no, I'm just sad. You're sad about something that happened to you the other day, like a little, oh, I got a bad grade on this. And that's totally acceptable. Everyone's feelings are valid. But being depressed over something like, oh, I broke my favorite pencil today, that can be a breaking point for someone who has depression. But I don't, I mean, of course, I'm not a licensed professional, but I don't think that would be a cause for depression, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a trigger, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So some things can be, yeah, some things can be a trigger. Those things are not always going to be a cause of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's other takes for people who do have it and people who don't have it. And so I think people should also, especially in this generation, when mental health is becoming more aware and more spoken about, I think people should become more sensitive and just a little more considerate and thoughtful about what they say and how they say it, especially to people who have mental illness, because it's not being coded anymore as much as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Here in America and anywhere else in the world, especially in Asian communities,
Mm-hmm.
um, where you're considered a bad person if you have a mental health issue in Asia,
Mm-hmm.
even though, and that only worsens it if you don't address it and if you consider it as something horrible, and like that makes you a bad person automatically. And it's not, and it should be taken into consideration, and it should be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people who struggle with accepting having a mental illness or accepting other people who struggle with it is a really big issue, and I think it really should be addressed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. And you touched a little bit about, being in Asia and how Asian communities and how Asian societies perceive mental health issues and mental health disorders. You're also mixed yourself. You're half American and you're half Japanese, which is how I met you. But anyways, I wanted to ask a little bit about, I'm also Japanese. I understand that a lot of the times it's, if they know that you have a mental health disorder, they don't really treat you properly, or they don't give you the adequate help that you need in order to move forward. But it's that, but it's also this, like a lot of people ignore it, it's as if it's not even there at times. So yeah, could you talk a little bit about how maybe in Japan or maybe in other Asian communities, how normalizing mental health talks are really important?
Yeah. I think that especially in Asian communities with like for high schoolers, I know a lot of countries like Korea and Japan have like your college entrance exams. And I know those take an extreme toll on high schoolers' mental health. You only have one chance to take it, and it's for the next 4 years or longer of your life. And that's how long it will affect it. And so that itself is it's very pressuring. And I know I've heard that kids develop a lot of depression and anxiety um, over that one entrance exam, and that really scares me. But also I think the parents of these students, like their generation, they that's how they dealt with health, is like you ignore it or you avoid it or something. And I think that really does take a toll on their kids who this generation are like, they're more observant, but because they have parents who aren't and who have dealt with it differently, they have to deal with it the same way with the knowledge of like, I know how to fix this, but I can't because my parents need the available resources. And I can't tell my parents because, their understanding of this mental health is different, and it's really difficult to change their opinion for something that they grew up with. My parent, she grew up in Japan, right? And so I think she also grew up with the idea that mental health is like, it's not as big of a deal as it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't spoken much about. And so now that we have all these resources, like, it's making it very difficult for us to communicate about it. And I am very grateful that she's trying, and I'm very grateful that she's open to communicating about it now. It's really great that we're all trying to advocate for mental health and, become aware of it. I'm really grateful that I have a parent who is willing to open up and shape their understanding differently of how to address mental health. And that should be vital for every parent, is to have open-mindedness and to at least listen to their child when they're in need of help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I wanted to ask you a little bit about how your school, which you described previously as a little competitive, did they do anything, or how did they react to, maybe just around COVID, or maybe just around your issues with mental disorders as well? Did they do anything after that, or?
I haven't had anything intense enough for them to address anything I'm very grateful for. Um, but I do know our administrators of our school are very um, adamant about making sure we take care of ourselves during quarantine. And so
Mhm.
every week they send out an email, of like, oh, this is what we've done this week. And then like, you guys should take some time off this weekend to, just like reset yourself. And we also have these discussions once or twice every semester um, with our administrative team. And so the students are allowed to send out anonymous questions, or they can ask them during the meeting about issues pertaining to anything. So it can be about mental health. It can be about how our workload on mental health, because I know a lot of students at our school have received an overwhelming amount of work, and we've had some students stand up for themselves and for others, saying this is too much and we can't mentally handle it. And some people will stay up till like 4 a.m. just doing schoolwork, and they get up 2 hours later just to get back to school, and it's really tolling. And so I think our administrative team, they've been great about being open-minded and being accept and listening, because that whole meeting is all about, we're listening to your issues so we can see how to address them. And I'm very grateful that we have an administrative team who does that. But I also think that some of the changes are not being fully addressed as we'd like. And I think that's not necessarily the administrative team's issue, but we also have a lot of teachers. And so having to convince all of those teachers is also very difficult, and I understand that. But that is another main issue, is some teachers just don't really understand, or they don't give out the effort to understand, and that can really irk a lot of students and even a lot of administrators.
So, outside of the school community, I also wanted to ask you how you think the media, whether that be TikTok or Instagram or TV shows that are currently like popular on Netflix, how do they portray a different or like maybe similar idea of mental health disorders and these struggles?
Yeah, I think a lot of shows now, compared to a lot of shows a couple years ago or a few years ago, well, personally, like the ones that I've watched and the ones that I'm familiar with, the ones a few years ago, like, and I think like classic shows and like a popular or a classic like teen romantic film, it usually has some sort of vibe with mental illness, and they always incorporate that into romanticizing that mental illness into the film. And I think that's a really, really big issue, because that can lead a lot of students, including myself, into spiraling and into also just kind of developing similar thought processes and similar actions like ones in the films, because this generation is very influenced by whatever we see on screens, and seeing you know mental health being romanticized, I think it's a very dangerous and a very tedious idea. But I think now a lot of shows and films and also social media like TikTok and Instagram are very thoughtful about what they portray about mental illness, especially because things like TikTok and Instagram, it's independent people, and it might not always be a social influencer who's extremely popular. It can always be someone who's just as casual as the everyday person. And so having their opinions as well is very, it's really nice to know that you're not alone, and that other people have the same concepts as you. And having someone, and also having a popular influencer like an artist or someone who has those exact same ideas is really it's really helpful and motivational. And so not having something that's scripted like a show or a film, I think, is also really important for social media standards about mental health, because they are allowed to say what they believe is right. And sometimes that's not always portrayed in something that's scripted. And so that might perceive the actor as someone who, like, maybe they don't believe in mental health, but they really do, and it's just scripted. And so I think that's just something to be very cautious about.
So I know that you and your friends at PVA are currently running this account called Purple at PVA. I think it's also a club, right?
Yes.
Yes, it's also a club. So along with that, why do you think it's so important to talk about this issue, especially now in our generation?
I think our generation, as it's building, like I've said before, we're very observant about mental health awareness now. And high school and middle school times are usually where, kids go through puberty, and we have a lot of hormonal changes, which can affect your mental illness and create mental illnesses like depression or anxiety. And so, because our generation is so observant about it, that we will have the ability to teach future generations, and like siblings, younger siblings, and even older generations, about how impactful mental illness can be on someone. Also, like in quarantine and COVID and stuff, a lot of countries are still within lockdown, especially America. A lot of the states have it really badly right now, and we still don't exactly know when things will settle down. And so, having to know that even after a year of being in lockdown, we still have to, stay safe and socially distance and wear our masks, and prevent physical touch, which can be a really helpful thing for some people, especially with a mental health disorder. Just because, physical touch, like a hug, every single day, some people might have taken advantage of that. And so not being able to have the ability to do that anymore, it might take a toll. It might take more of a toll than they expected. And I personally have also realized, like, wow, I should have hugged my friends more a lot every day. And I should have, like, been supportive and been like, hey, I'm here, like, if you want to hug or anything, and now I can't do that. And so it's really difficult. And so I think, especially times in quarantine, like, it's really important to just call and check up on your friends, or text them, or DM them, or even email them something. I don't know. But just, like, I think keeping in touch is really important, especially now. I've had a couple friends who have developed mental disorders during quarantine, because of quarantine. So I think it's really important than ever. And I think it's also important to maintain the consistency of how much we check our relatives and our friends.
Yeah, I definitely agree as well. Like, even in Belgium, COVID obviously had a large impact on us mentally. It did definitely take a toll on a lot of students around the world. And academically, you still have to go on online school, and you're basically missing the whole point, at least my personal point, of actually seeing your friends at school. So it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of additional worry that just adds on to your already very stressful life. So I definitely agree with you, and I think that's a really important. So overall, what are your hopes for the future and about this topic, and what do you hope to see in the next few years?
I hope that, well, for the people who are growing up in this generation or who are extremely close to this generation, develop some open-mindedness and just a little bit of empathy towards people who have mental illness. And I think that can really help in a way of support, because sometimes it can be really scary to know, like, do I trust this person? Should I trust them with these extremely personal thoughts, um, or should I keep it all to myself right now and maybe find someone else? That's always really scary, is like you never know who to trust. And so I think allowing more people to help understand and at least know, like, this is what it's like, you know I think that's extremely important, and that people should just be more aware of it. um, and then I think, especially after quarantine, everyone's gonna want to, be hugging their friends and wanting to meet up. And I, of course, that's something I look forward to every single day, is, like, oh, the pandemic's over, like quarantine's over, it's going to be, I can go see all of my friends again all at once and not have to worry about getting anyone sick, which is also a really big impact for people who have maybe anxiety or something. It's like, oh gosh, I don't want to get my friends sick, so I'm just going to stay home as much as I want to see them.
Do you want to say anything about HSP, the Purple PVA?
Purple at PVA is a club that my friend made, and she asked me to join and help out. Um, and it's basically a student support group in a way. So maybe for some people who don't have resources like therapy, and I'm not saying that this is an alternative. I'm just saying, like, this is a temporary, support, because some people just don't have the ability to maybe have professional therapy, or they don't have the ability to talk to someone that they're comfortable with. And so my friend Daniela, she made this because she and I and all the other officers believe that it's very important to have a good support group. And so having the ability to talk to someone, even if it's one person, can be really helpful for someone who's very alone and depressed or anxious, or um, who's just struggling with their mental health at the moment, especially nowadays. And so we made this club as an opportunity for students to have support.
That's perfect. Yeah. Anyways, thank you very much for this interview. I hope everybody else really enjoyed it as well. To our viewers, which will be watching later on, thank you so much for joining us today, and your participation means a lot to myself as well as Micah and the everybody else. So thank you so much. And for our next event, Morgana will be interviewing Katrina on the topic of sustainable fashion. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day. Bye, Micah.